Last night, Manila Airport stopped. Not because some Hollywood celebrity landed, not because a K-pop idol showed up, but because a 1-year-old girl with a tennis racket walked through the arrivals gate. I'm talking full shutdown mode. Police escorts, banners hanging from the terminal, a live band playing, hundreds of fans holding Philippine flags, people cheering so loud you could hear them 3 gates over. This wasn't a homecoming. This was a coronation. Alex Eala had just come home from Wimbledon, and the entire country wanted to welcome her like she was a national hero. But here's the thing that gets me. Here's what actually matters. 10 years ago, this same girl was training at a local tennis court in the suburbs. She wasn't wearing Nike. She wasn't working with some fancy coach. She was wearing ruffled socks, light-up shoes. She had chubby cheeks. She was just a kid with a dream that nobody else seemed to believe in. So how did we get from there to this? How does a girl from the Philippines, a country that wasn't exactly known for producing tennis superstars, end up walking through an airport to a standing ovation from her entire nation? That's the question that keeps sitting with me. That's the story I need to understand. Because what happened at Wimbledon wasn't just about tennis. It wasn't just about one player winning one tournament. It was bigger than that. It was about a moment that changed how an entire country sees itself. It was about a girl who refused to accept the limits people had set for her. And it was about what happens when someone from nowhere decides they're going to be something. But to understand how Eala got here, we need to go back, way back. We need to understand where she came from, what she was fighting against, and what it took for her to become the player who could walk into Manila Airport like this. Because this moment, this homecoming, it didn't happen by accident. It happened because of a journey that started in a place you'd never expect. Eala didn't grow up in a tennis family. That's important to know right from the start. Her father was a business executive. Her mother was the CFO of Globe Telecom, one of the biggest telecommunications companies in the Philippines. These weren't people who played tennis professionally. They weren't connected to the tennis world. They were just a regular family trying to build a life in Quezon City. But there was one person who changed everything. One person who looked at a young girl and saw something nobody else was seeing yet. Her grandfather. He was the one who taught her to play. Not at some fancy academy, not with some elite coaching program. He taught her at a local tennis court, the kind of place where most people don't become champions. The kind of place where dreams don't usually come true. And Eala, as a little girl, didn't see it as this grand plan to become a professional athlete. She saw it as playtime with her grandfather. She saw it as fun. She was just hitting balls, running around, learning the game because the person she loved was teaching it to her. That foundation mattered more than you'd think, because here's the reality of what Eala was up against. The Philippines isn't exactly a traditional tennis powerhouse. When you think of tennis, you think of places like Spain, France, Australia, the United States. You think of countries with deep tennis histories, countries with established academies and coaches and infrastructure. The Philippines, that's not one of them. Tennis, there is a niche sport. It's basketball that dominates. It's boxing. It's the big sports that capture the nation's attention. And when Eala started training, when she started competing at the junior level, she was doing it in a country where almost nobody was watching. Almost nobody cared. Almost nobody believed it was even possible for a Filipino girl to make it on the world stage. By 2020, when she was just 15 years old, Eala became the first Filipino ever to win a major junior title. She won the girls' singles at the US Open. Think about that. First Filipino ever in the entire history of the sport. But here's what's wild. Outside of the Philippines, almost nobody knew her name. Outside of her country, it barely registered because she was from the wrong place. Because she was competing in a sport that didn't have a strong tradition where she was from. Then came 2023 and 2024. Eala turned professional and stepped into the WTA Tour. That's when reality hit hard. The transition to professional tennis wasn't a smooth climb. It was a fall, a steep, brutal fall. She was getting knocked out of Grand Slams in the first round. Australian Open, first round. Roland Garros, first round. US Open, first round. Over and over again. Her ranking dropped. By mid-2024, she was sitting at number 143 inches the world. 143. Think about what that means. That's barely ranking. That's the equivalent of being invisible in the professional tennis world. She was a girl who had done everything right. She had trained. She had sacrificed. She had become the first Filipino to do incredible things at the junior level, and now she was getting destroyed by players she'd never heard of. And the worst part? The thing that really gets to me? She was doing this alone. She wasn't from a country that pumped resources into women's tennis. She didn't have a built-in support system. She didn't have scouts from powerful nations trying to recruit her. She was just out there by herself, trying to figure out how to compete against players from countries that had been investing in this sport for decades. That's when people started asking the real question. That's when the doubt crept in. Is this even possible? Can a girl from the Philippines actually make it? Or is this just a nice story that's about to end? Because that's the thing nobody talks about. It's not just about talent. It's not just about how hard you work. Sometimes it's about where you come from. Sometimes it's about whether the rest of the world is willing to believe in you. And in 2024, it seemed like the answer was no. The thing about being ranked 143 inches the world is that nobody sees you anymore. You're not famous enough to get sponsorships. You're not good enough to get easy draws at tournaments. You're stuck in this middle ground where you're professional enough to know how hard this is, but not successful enough for anyone to care. Ella lived there for over a year. Let me walk you through what that actually looked like. Because the numbers don't tell you the real story. In 2023, she played the Australian Open. First Grand Slam of her professional career. You know what happened? She lost in the first round to a player most people have never heard of. She flew all the way to Melbourne, trained for months, and she was done in one match. Then Roland Garros came around. She was probably thinking maybe this would be different. Maybe clay would suit her game better. Maybe this was her moment. Nope, first round again. Out. By the time US Open rolled around, there was this thing happening. This thing that doesn't show up in the statistics but destroys players from the inside. She was starting to wonder. You ever been somewhere long enough where you start believing that maybe it's just not going to happen? That maybe you're not cut out for this? That's what was happening to Eala. But here's where it gets darker. Because it wasn't just the losses. It was what the losses meant. When you're ranked 143 inches the world, the tour doesn't give you the easy draws. You're not seeded. You don't get the good schedule slots. You get matched up against players who are hungry, who are trying to prove something, who see you as a stepping stone. Eala was walking into matches where she was the underdog every single time, where she had to be better, smarter, faster, just to get to the second round. And she wasn't winning those matchups. So what do you do when you keep losing? When you keep getting knocked out in the first round, you start changing things. You start second-guessing yourself. You wonder if your technique is wrong. You wonder if you're mentally tough enough. You wonder if maybe everyone else was right all along. That psychological weight, that's the kind of thing that breaks players. By 2024, Eala had compiled a record like this across multiple Grand Slams. First-round exits, rankings stuck around 140 to 150. She'd been given multiple chances to prove herself on the biggest stages in the world, and each time she'd come up short. Each time, she'd gone home empty-handed. Here's the mini question that was eating at her. How many more times can you lose before you stop believing? But it got worse, because there was this other layer to it that made it even more brutal. Eala wasn't just fighting against the players across the net from her. She was fighting against a system that didn't believe in her. The Philippines has produced incredible athletes in basketball and boxing. But tennis is different. Tennis requires money. It requires infrastructure. It requires countries to invest in their young players over years. The Philippines wasn't doing that for Eala. not at the level she needed. So she was out there competing against players from Spain, from France, from Germany, from the United States, players who had been trained at elite academies since they were 6 years old, players whose countries had invested millions in their development, players who had never known what it was like to doubt whether their country believed in them. Eala had known that her entire career. Meanwhile, her ranking kept sliding. Not dramatically, not in this sudden crash, but like a slow descent. Inch by inch, match by match, she was sinking, and with every loss, the question got louder. Is this even possible? Can someone from the Philippines actually make it in professional tennis? Or is this just a story that ends in disappointment? By mid-2024, she'd hit rock bottom, ranked 143, losing in first rounds. No Grand Slam wins to speak of, no breakthrough moment. Just a girl who was trying and failing and trying again and failing again. And the thing that makes this moment the darkest is this. There was no sign it was about to change. There was no indication that relief was coming. There was just the slow, grinding realization that maybe this wasn't going to work out. Maybe this dream, this thing she'd been chasing since she was a little girl with light-up shoes and ruffled socks, maybe it was just never going to happen. But then March came around, and something shifted. March 2025. Miami Open. WTA 1000 tournament. Nobody was expecting much from Eala. She was a wild card entry, which means she basically snuck into the tournament. She wasn't seeded, she wasn't ranked high enough to be considered a threat. She was just this girl from the Philippines who'd been losing in first rounds for over a year. The draw came out, and honestly, it should have been a disaster for her. Should have been another quick exit. Should have been another confirmation that she didn't belong. But here's where the twist happens. Here's where everything changes. She played Madison Keys. Madison Keys is top 5 in the world, multiple Grand Slam quarterfinalist. A player with explosiveness and power that most people can't match. On paper, it shouldn't have been close. Eala won. Then she played Iga Swiatek. And I need you to understand what Iga Swiatek is. She's won 6 Grand Slam titles. She was the #2 player in the world. She's the defending champion at Roland Garros. She's one of the most dominant forces in women's tennis right now. Eala beat her too, so she's in the semifinals of a WTA 1000 tournament. The semifinals. Do you understand what that means? That's the first time a Filipino player has ever reached that stage at a premier tournament. Ever. But here's the thing that matters more than the results. Here's the actual twist. It wasn't that she suddenly got better at tennis. Her serve didn't get 10 miles per hour faster overnight. Her forehand didn't become dramatically more consistent. Her technique didn't radically transform between losing in first rounds and beating top 5 players. What changed was how she saw herself, because the thing nobody talks about is this: Eala was already good enough. She had the talent, she had the technique, she had everything she needed to beat these players. The thing she didn't have was permission to believe she belonged in the same court as them, and Miami gave her that permission. When she beat Madison Keys, something clicked. When she beat Iga Swiatek, something shifted. She walked onto that court, and for the first time, she stopped playing like she had something to prove to the world. She started playing like she had something to prove to herself. Think about what that means psychologically. Think about how many times you've done something amazing the moment you stop being afraid of failing. Think about how different you are when you're playing not to lose versus playing to win. That's what changed for Eala. And this is the part that gets me, because it flips everything you thought you understood about her struggle. You thought the problem was that she wasn't good enough. You thought she needed to train harder, practice more, find some secret technique. The real problem was that she'd spent so long losing that she'd forgotten she was capable of winning. Miami reminded her. Now here's my question for you, because I genuinely want to know what you think about this. Because this idea that your biggest barrier isn't your talent but your belief in yourself, that's the kind of thing that changes how you see everything that came before it. Does that change how you see those first-round losses? Does that make them mean something different? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious what you think. Because the moment this shift happened, the moment Eala believed she belonged, everything else accelerated. The wins started piling up, the rankings started climbing, but more importantly, she started playing with a confidence that hadn't been there before. And that confidence would lead her to do something that had never been done before in the history of tennis. Something that would change how an entire country saw itself. But that's coming. Because 1 year later, in June 2026, Eala would walk onto center court at Wimbledon, the most prestigious court in the world. And she would do something that would make that moment at Miami look like just the beginning. So after Miami, the question was simple. Was that a one-time thing? Was that a flash in the pan, one good tournament, and then back to reality? The answer came fast. Eala didn't just maintain that level. She built on it. She started winning consistently. She reached the final at Eastbourne. She won a WTA 125 title in Guadalajara. By the end of 2025, her ranking had jumped all the way to number 50. She'd gone from 143 to 50 inches 1 year. That's not gradual improvement. That's acceleration. And then 2026 hit. She won a WTA 125 title in Birmingham. She reached the semi-final of the Berlin Open. She was now consistently beating players ranked way above her. Her record against top 10 players was stacking up. 7 wins against top 10 opponents. 7. Think about that. A girl who couldn't win a single match against anyone ranked above 100 just 2 years earlier was now regularly taking down the best players in the world. But none of that mattered compared to what happened next. Wimbledon 2026, center court, the most prestigious stage in all of tennis. Eala walked into that tournament seeded number 29. That might not sound like much until you understand what that means. It was the first time a Filipino player had ever been seeded at a Grand Slam. The first time, ever. She wasn't supposed to do much. The draw was tough. The seeded players above her were expected to advance. It was just supposed to be a solid run, maybe reach the second week if she got lucky. Then she played Iga Swiatek, again. Except this time it was different. This wasn't Miami. This was Wimbledon. This was the defending champion. This was the 3rd seed. This was one of the most dominant players on the planet, defending her title on the most famous court in the world. And Eala beat her 7 to 6 inches the first set, 6 to 2 inches the second set. Do you understand what that first set means? That was an 11 to 9 tiebreak. 11 to 9. That's the kind of match where 1 point either way and Eala is going home. She saved set points. Multiple set points. She had moments where she could have crumbled and lost, and instead, she dug in. She played smart. She played brave. She won. And when it was over, when she'd just beaten the defending champion on center court, she broke down. She gave this on-court interview where she was literally crying, struggling to get the words out, and she said something that connected everything. She said, "I went to train with my brother and my grandfather every day after school with my ruffled socks and light-up shoes and chubby cheeks. So to younger me, this is everything. Do you see what just happened? Do you see how that moment connected the entire journey? From that little girl training with her grandfather to standing on center court after beating the defending champion. That's not just a tennis win. That's validation of an entire decade of believing in something nobody else believed in. She reached the 4th round, first Filipino to ever do that at a Grand Slam, ever. She eventually lost to Jasmine Paolini in the 4th round, but that didn't matter anymore. The moment was already complete, and then her ranking did something incredible. She jumped to number 28. Career high. Highest-ranked Filipino player in the entire history of the WTA Tour. Not number 143, not number 50, number 28. In the top 30 inches the entire world. Here's the reward for staying with me this long, because this is the thing almost nobody talks about. When Eala beat Swiatek at Wimbledon, she wasn't just winning a tennis match. She was proving something about herself that went way deeper than tennis. She was proving that the person you believe you can be is actually real. She was proving that the barriers you thought were permanent were actually just illusions you'd accepted. Because think about what changed between ranking 143 and ranking 28. Not her forehand, not her serve, not her conditioning. What changed was her mind. What changed was that she finally believed she deserved to be there. And when you believe that, everything changes. The proof of the Miami shift wasn't just in the wins that followed. The proof was in how she played on the biggest stage in the world and didn't flinch. The proof was in that tiebreak against Swiatek, where 1 point separated her from going home, and she didn't back down. The proof was in that on-court speech where she connected her present moment to that little girl she used to be. That's what happens when someone finally gives themselves permission to be great. But here's what really matters. Here's why this moment is bigger than just one player winning some matches. Because when Eala walked into that airport in Manila, when her entire country came to greet her like she was a national hero, they weren't just celebrating tennis wins. They were celebrating something way more powerful. They were celebrating the moment someone from nowhere decided they weren't going to accept nowhere as their final destination. And that changes everything. So here's the answer to the question that started this whole thing. How did we get from a girl with ruffled socks training at a local court to an entire nation stopping at the airport to welcome her home as a hero? We got there because she refused to accept the story everyone else was telling about her. We got there because she kept going even when the evidence suggested she should stop. We got there because at some point she decided that being from the Philippines didn't mean she had to stay small. That being unknown didn't mean she had to stay invisible, that the barriers in front of her weren't permanent, they were just tests, and she passed the test. But here's what matters more than her story. Here's what actually changed the world. When Eala came home from Wimbledon, when she walked through Manila Airport to that standing ovation, something shifted in how an entire country saw itself. Because for the first time, the Philippines had a tennis player who was competing at the absolute highest level and winning. Not just participating, winning against the defending champion. On the most prestigious court in the world. And suddenly, thousands of kids in the Philippines started thinking differently about themselves. Suddenly, the question wasn't whether it was possible for someone from the Philippines to make it in tennis. The question became how high could they go? That's the real power of what Eala did. It wasn't just about her ranking. It wasn't just about winning matches. It was about changing what's possible for an entire generation. Because now there are young girls training at courts all over the Philippines. Now, there are parents who believe their daughters can compete at Wimbledon. Now, there's infrastructure being built and investment being made because one girl proved that it was actually possible. She didn't just become a champion, she became a permission slip. She became the proof that the story doesn't have to end the way everyone expects it to. And the thing is, her story isn't over. It's barely even started. Right now, in July 2026, Eala is ranked number 28. But looking at her trajectory, looking at the way she's competing, there's no reason she can't crack the top 20. There's no reason she can't reach the quarterfinals of a major. There's no reason she can't become one of the dominant forces in women's tennis in the next few years. The question isn't whether she's capable anymore, the question is how far she's willing to go. And I think the answer is a lot further than any of us are expecting. So here's the thing. If you want to know what happens next, if you want to follow this story as it continues to unfold, as Eala keeps climbing and keeps breaking barriers that nobody thought could be broken, you need to stick around. Because the US Open is coming, the Canadian Open is coming. There are tournaments ahead where she's going to do things that will shock the world again. And I'm going to be documenting all of it. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because this isn't the end of Eala's story. This is just the moment everyone finally started paying attention.